Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, Decision Day. The CDC's vaccine advisory panel is slated to decide today on whether to put Johnson & Johnson's shot back on the shelf. We'll take you through the meeting's possible outcomes and the uphill battle health officials could face in terms of the public's confidence in the shot. On the record, an alternate juror in the trial of Derek Chauvin is now making her voice heard on the landmark case.
Were you surprised that he didn't testify?
No. I expected him not to testify. So I think the prosecutor had a really strong case, and I think he would have incriminated himself even further.
Her experience inside the courtroom as the Minneapolis community mourns the loss of 20-year-old Daunte Wright. Also, a mother's grief. The family of Ma'Khia Bryant, the 16-year-old involved in a fatal police shooting in Columbus on Tuesday, is now speaking out.
Ma'Khia was a sweet little girl. She didn't deserve what happened to her. It's unbelievable. It's heartbreaking.
We'll bring you more from that emotional interview and what we now know about the investigation. And liftoff. SpaceX, along with NASA, has made aeronautical history once again with another successful launch this morning.
3, 2, 1, 0. Mission and liftoff. Godspeed, Endeavour and Crew 2.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
The mission shuttled 4 astronauts to the International Space Station on a previously used craft. We'll look at what that means for the future of spaceflight. Joe, I don't know how you can hear that countdown and lift off and not be pumped up, especially on a Friday morning.
It was one of the perks of waking up early this morning.
It was. Getting to actually watch it live. It was so neat. And we'll have a lot more on that and some of the other history made there a little bit later. But first, the future of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine could be decided today.
A CDC panel will meet to figure out whether to end the pause on the one-dose shot. This comes as state officials in Oregon and Texas say the CDC is now investigating 2 new possible cases of the rare blood clot that put the vaccine on pause. One woman in Oregon died. Another woman in Texas is in the hospital with symptoms similar to the other cases. Now, that's in addition to the initial 6 cases in women who suffered this clot after getting the vaccine. One of those 6 women died. NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella is following the latest on the J&J vaccine. So, Heidi, what are some of the possible decisions that health officials could make today when it comes to the J&J vaccine?
Well, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Look, they could decide to just punt and extend this pause, but that is not what most public health officials are expecting, at least as of yesterday, including Dr. Fauci. They say that this pause was a wait and see period. We've waited, but we've not seen a crush of additional cases that suggest there is a major problem here with the side effects. And in the meantime, the benefits of this drug far outweigh the risks, given that 5,000 people a day do continue to die of COVID.
So, Heidi, European regulators recommended the vaccine for use earlier this week, but with a warning label about the rare blood clots. Now, you spoke to a doctor who's in charge of rolling out the vaccine in Virginia. That's the state with the one death connected to this type of blood clot. What did that doctor tell you about the warnings that could come with the vaccine?
Most likely he is expecting some kind of a warning level mentioning that this is a rare condition. However, combined with low blood platelet counts, that there is this rare side effect of a very serious blood clotting condition, particularly in women the ages of 18 to 48. Now, they may also use this time period to warn doctors because this type of blood clotting is not treated with the standard frontline treatment. However, all things being said, take a listen to why he thinks ultimately it will be put out back into circulation.
So the fact that they're not seeing an overwhelming number of new cases makes it pretty likely that they will go ahead and reapprove Johnson & Johnson and perhaps accompany that with, just a caveat or a warning label that says, this has a slightly higher increased risk of stroke, although still exceedingly rare. I think we'll have to wait and see what the American public does with that.
And if it is reapproved, we could see that drug back out on shelves within days, if not hours.
Yeah, speaking of what will the American public do with it, if J&J is cleared for use again, what kind of challenges do public officials face when it comes to confidence in the vaccine?
Look, the good news is the initial polling data shows us that this pause has not had a huge effect on public confidence. However, there are indications that some members of the public may need additional reassurances and additional messaging. Take a listen to an individual that we met earlier this week at a vaccination clinic.
In my personal opinion, hearing about what happened with J&J, I would much rather do Moderna all day. But it'll be interesting to see it.
How did you feel when the news came out?
I felt, honestly, when the J&J came out with the one-time deal, I felt it was almost too good to be true. So I was thinking to myself, you know, there's got to be something, there's got to be a catch. Hopefully nothing comes out, but unfortunately it did.
Given that this vaccine, guys, was considered the vaccine of choice for reaching certain underserved populations, it may be necessary for FDA, CDC, and other public health officials to really go ahead and reassure the public once this is back out.
That's right. All right, Heidi, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just days after the murder conviction of Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd, one of the alternate jurors is now speaking out about the case.
It's really sad. How did a $20 bill in question end up in somebody's death? It boggles my mind.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Minneapolis with more on this. Shaq, good morning. So that's Lisa Christensen, one of two alternates. So she sat through the entire trial, and then alternates are dismissed when deliberations begin. So she didn't contribute to the guilty verdicts, but she heard all the evidence that the jurors who did contribute to those verdicts heard. How did she feel about the outcome of the case, and what stood out to her during her time in court?
Well, it really struck me during that interview, Savannah. What stood out to her was consistent with what stood out to legal analysts, what we were highlighting after those days of testimony. She said that the testimony of Dr. Martin Tobin, that was something that really connected with her. The moment when he said, this is the specific time when George Floyd lost his life, and how he broke down the different factors, the pressure from the cement, the pressure that the neck and the knee on the neck and back put on George Floyd. She also said the bystanders, that really stuck out to her, in the testimony, emotional testimony that we heard in the courtroom, especially Darnella Frazier, who took the video, and she said she felt the sense of guilt that you also heard in some of the witnesses there. Listen to a little bit of what she said in terms of experiencing the verdict. Remember, she was not part of it, but listen to what she said in terms of watching it on television.
I heard it was going to be announced, so I came home and turned the TV on, and, you know, I was anxiously waiting for the verdict to happen, and I didn't know they were going to do all three charges. I thought at least one or two of them, but and I was kind of amazed that it was all three charges.
Do you feel justice was served here?
I do. Of course, you know, it's painful for the Floyd family, and nothing's going to bring back their family member, but I feel like everything was done that could possibly be done to give them closure and justice.
What'd you make of Derek Chauvin in the courtroom?
I felt bad for him. I really did. Felt sorry for him. I guess what stood out for me is that video. They took a still photo of it, of him on Mr. Floyd's neck with his hand in his pocket. And I felt like the message I was getting from that photo was like, I'm here to do my job and nobody's going to tell me how to do it.
She also said that because of the layout of the courtroom, every once in a while, as she was looking between the prosecutors and the witnesses, she would lock eyes with Derek Chauvin, and she said she would try to break away, and she didn't think that he was doing it with any ill intent, but that was just something that made her a little bit uncomfortable sitting there in the courtroom listening to the testimony.
Yeah, I heard her describe that as an uncomfortable moment. Now, Shaq, Lisa lives actually in Brooklyn Center. Now, that's where Daunte Wright was killed by police last week, and it set off several nights of protests. Now, the jury wasn't sequestered until deliberations began. So what did she say about how aware they were of Daunte Wright's killing, of those protests? And did that case and what was going on there affect her thoughts on the Chauvin trial at all?
and that's a good point that you make, Savannah, that she was not sequestered during the actual trial. And because she didn't participate in deliberations, she really wasn't sequestered at all. And she said she lived just about 6 or 7 blocks away from that police station, which was the main source of those clashes in the days after Daunte Wright's killing. And she said she heard the helicopters overhead, the police helicopters, the helicopters of the news crews over her house late into the night. She said she heard some of the flashbangs and some of the clashes from her house. So she was aware of the situation. She was aware of the backlash that was happening. But, you know, it's something that she said didn't have an effect on her process in the trial. It did have an effect on her, she said, but not in how she was analyzing the testimony.
And also, Shaq, the funeral of Daunte Wright took place there in Minneapolis yesterday. That's where you joined us from, outside of where that was happening yesterday. Loved ones joined civil rights leaders to call for justice. Tell us more about that message and about the ceremony.
That's right. It was an incredibly emotional ceremony that went between, you know, really painful moments where you saw his mother crying, coming up, talking about the memories, talking about how when he had his 2-year-old son, or his son that is now 2 years old, how that really changed him and made him more serious, and how much love he poured into his son. And then it turned into purpose when we heard from the speakers. We heard from Benjamin Crump with a plea for justice. We heard from the Reverend Al Sharpton. Listen to a little bit of what the Reverend had to say.
It's time to bring a new day where we don't have to videotape when we see a badge, but where we know that they're there to serve and protect, not treat us like we've been convicted.
We also saw a lot of high-level dignitaries there. The governor of the state of Minnesota was there. Both of Minnesota's senators were there. We saw Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Attorney General Keith Ellison. Remember, the Floyd family was also there in support of Daunte Wright. So it was definitely a real end to this week that saw a variety of emotions, from the conviction of Derek Chauvin earlier in the week to laying Daunte Wright to rest for the final time.
A variety of emotions. Isn't that true? Shaq, thank you so much.
The decades-long fight to add another star to the American flag took one step forward Thursday. The House of Representatives voted along party lines to make Washington, D.C. the 51st state. Now, a statehood standoff in the Senate likely looms. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now. Leanne, good morning to you. So this is the second time that D.C. statehood has passed in the House in less than a year. This time, of course, Democrats control the Senate, but barely. So what might happen in the Senate? What are both sides saying?
Well, let's start with what happened in the House, and that did pass along party lines. All Democrats voted for this legislation, but there was very strong opposition from Republicans. Let's listen to their argument, and then you'll hear a pro-D.C. statehood argument at the end of this.
D.C. wouldn't even qualify as a singular congressional district, and here they are. They want the power and the authority of being an entire state.
Let me tell you what Democrat support is really about of H.R. 51. Democratic partisanship, Democrat power, Democrat policy.
The truth is, there is no good faith argument for disenfranchising over 700,000 people, most of whom are people of color. These desperate objections are about fear.
And I just want to fact check Representative Nancy Mace for a quick second. She says it wouldn't qualify as a congressional district. Well, D.C. has about 700,000 residents. So it would, in fact. Now, what happens next to the legislation? It does go to the Senate, but like all legislation that passes the Senate, it needs the support of 60 senators. So it means 10 Republicans. It does not have that yet, as Republicans are opposed. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said that he will do everything in his power to pass it, but he has not said that he would get rid of the filibuster for it, and he has not promised yet a vote on the Senate floor. Joe.
Leanne, speaking of the Senate yesterday, in a rare act of bipartisanship, senators voted to approve legislation targeting anti-Asian hate crimes. How did that play out, and what's next for this bill?
This was a big moment for the Senate. They passed some serious legislation with both Republicans and Democrats. Only one Republican voted against it, Senator Josh Hawley. But Democrats and Republicans are praising this as a real bipartisan moment against, and while this legislation does just mostly focus on data collection. It sends a very strong message, but there were changes made to accommodate Republicans, which Democrats actually say made the bill better. So it must go back to the House for the House to repass it before it goes to the president's desk for signature, Joe.
And Leanne, yesterday was a busy day on the Hill. As you know full well, Republicans also unveiled their counter proposal to President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. What are they presenting? And is there any chance for any sort of bipartisan agreement here?
Well, they are presenting a $568 billion proposal focused on transportation infrastructure and broadband, which they say is the actual definition of infrastructure, something that Democrats disagree with. Now, Republicans are very clear-eyed here. They know that their bill is not going to be taken up, but they are saying that they hope that it becomes the basis for negotiations and discussions. Now, Democrats mostly panned the legislation, but we're still very early in these talks, and there is a lot of support on Capitol Hill, growing support for at least to do the transportation infrastructure in a bipartisan way, Joe.
All right, Leanne, thank you so much for covering all of it for us this morning.
Yep.
We're hearing more from the family of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant, expressing their grief and questions about what happened. Bryant was shot and killed by a police officer in Columbus, Ohio on Tuesday. Police say they were responding to a 911 call about an attempted stabbing and have released body camera footage of the chaotic scene the officers encountered when they arrived. Just before, Officer Nick Reardon drew his weapon and fired. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation is now handling the case. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barra is in Columbus, Ohio for us with the latest. Maura, good morning. So now we know, as I just mentioned, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation is handling this case, and more evidence keeps coming. Some of it's in the form of that body camera footage. Now, NBC News has tried to reach that officer for comment, but what do we know so far about him and this case and what other authorities in the area are saying?
Good morning, Savannah. Yeah, that 911 audio and the body cam video does give us a picture of what happened from the officer's point of view, but there's still a lot we don't know about the altercation leading up to the shooting. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation saying it could take weeks of investigation as they continue to interview the officer and witnesses. But what we hear is that he actually doesn't have a ton of experience here in Columbus. He was only 23 years old and had joined the police force in 2019. He has no complaints against him right now, but his team and the police union defending his decision to fire his weapon. I want you to hear from the police union president, who speaks a little bit about what we see in the body cam video.
What we've seen in a lot of circumstances and heard from the 911 calls, we can see what we think has unfolded, but there is more to look at. There will be an independent investigation done that will get those answers. But we can speak on what we know now that's been released by the city of Columbus. We can certainly see that lives were at stake.
There have been some questions from the community about why the gun was used and not an alternative use of force or way to disarm Ma'Khia Bryant. But the police chief on Wednesday defending the officer's actions as well, saying that because Bryant was holding a knife, that qualified as a deadly force, and he was trained to shoot at the central part of her body. Savannah.
Now, Maura, you mentioned this investigation could last weeks. That's what we're hearing. And as it continues, what's the latest on the reaction from the community?
There's a lot of frustration in the community overall, just between the relationship of Columbus and the police department here, Savannah. In fact, Ma'Khia Bryant's death is actually the 34th over 6 years, the 34th person, to be shot and killed by law enforcement. And so there's this frustration that exists. There were protests, quiet, peaceful protests the past few nights following the incident and the release of the body cam. But last night was relatively quiet. Overall, the community asking for more efforts on police reform.
And now, Maura, I mentioned that NBC News has spoken with several members of Ma'Khia's family. We actually played a little bit of that at the very top of the show. One of those people is her mother. What did her family say about her, and what did they say about this shooting?
Well, her family's heartbroken, Savannah, and I want to play you a little bit more of that interview to get a sense of how her mother is feeling right now.
The pain of losing a child is something that no parent wants to go through. I'm deeply hurt. I'm still processing this. I'm still mourning. Ma'Khia was a sweet little girl. She didn't deserve what happened to her.
Both her mother and her aunt saying that Ma'Khia Bryant was defending herself against the two other females that we see in that video. They said that her having the knife and reacting that way was extremely out of character. Her friends and teachers in the community also describing Ma'Khia as a very larger-than-life personality and someone with a bright future. Savannah.
Maura, thank you so much.
Time for a check at your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns, it was freezing this morning.
Now who is complaining?
About time.
Exactly, right? It comes all full circle. All right, so let's get into this forecast because we're going from talking about snow and cold this week, and now we're shifting back to severe weather, and we could deal with tornadoes later on today. So our new storm is in the middle of the country, and it's not bad now. Now it's just a little bit of rain. But once the sun starts heating things up, later this afternoon, we're going to see storms starting to pop up, and we think that we could get some serious hailstorms. I mean, like really large hail, like baseball-sized hail out of some of these thunderstorms, especially the ones that form over like Oklahoma City, Dallas, Waco to Austin. And then those storms will roll from those areas through Louisiana and East Texas. So that area of orange and the enhanced risk, we do think we could get a few tornadoes in those areas, including near Shreveport or Alexandria, Lake Charles. And so we got to keep an eye on those areas. And if you have any friends or family in those locations, make sure they know that they have a threat of tornadoes and strong storms later today. Then on Saturday, we track these storms through the southeast. Again, isolated tornadoes and some large hail. Atlanta, Charleston, Savannah, Wilmington, all included in that risk. So for today's forecast, guys, the cold morning is going to be over with this afternoon in the Northeast. Should be pretty nice, recovering into the 60s, and the Southeast not bad. We'll also talk about the weekend forecast next hour. We have a new storm coming into the west, but we love it. We're actually going to get some unusual mid to late April rain and snow in California.
Wow. All right. Well, that's a tease. We'll see you next hour. Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
All right, coming up, an update on coronavirus vaccine trials in children.
We'll show you the 9-year-old twins who were the first young kids in the country to receive Pfizer's shot next.
After months of focusing on vaccinating American adults against COVID, the focus is now turning to kids under 16. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello spoke with children taking part in the trials that could decide when all ages will be able to get the shot.
At Duke Med Center this week, follow-up blood work from Marisol and Alejandro Gerardo.
Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
The 9-year-old twins were the first in the country to receive the Pfizer vaccine.
All done.
Part of a nationwide trial testing vaccine safety and efficacy on children between 6 months and 12 years. 12 to 16-year-olds are in a separate trial. While severe COVID-related illness and death are low in children, kids still account for 13.6% of all cases, 3.6 million so far, 88,000 cases last week alone. Vaccinating kids, say experts, is critical to building herd immunity. Marisol and Alejandro's parents, both doctors at Duke, felt a responsibility to volunteer their own daughters for the trial.
For us, and specifically for this vaccine, where tens of thousands of adults had already been dosed, and we felt quite confident in the safety profile.
In Kansas City, Michael and Joanna Kelly enrolled 2-year-old Nora.
Because we trust the science. We had the opportunity to sign up for this, and we talked it over, and we believe that this was an opportunity to keep our child safe.
Like similar trials involving the Moderna vaccine, doctors start low, then slowly increase the children's vaccine dose.
It's basically the Goldilocks effect, finding the right dose that produces a robust immune response with the least amount of side effects.
For the Gerardo girls, it's all about getting back to normal.
I want to have sleepovers and playdates again.
Fortunately, doctors say children generally tolerate the vaccine well with few side effects. The ultimate goal is to vaccinate every elementary school child in this country by this time next year. Savannah, Joe?
All right, Tom, thanks. Let's now bring in Dr. Natalie Azar. She's an NBC News medical contributor. Dr. Azar, good morning. My first question to you is, how adorable are those girls?
I know. I know. And I can't say that I was surprised that their parents were both doctors.
So actually, that's the first thing that I want to ask you about, is just kind of put in context here. Parents that are putting their children in these trials, obviously it's doing a huge service to this country, to the world, to figure out if this is safe in children. But just kind of talk to us here about the fact that these kids are in it and that it is safe so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, as Tom pointed out, there's a few different approaches to doing clinical trials for vaccines in kids. Number one, dosing is really, really important. You're not going to give the same dose to a 6-month-old child as you are to, let's say, a 12-year-old. Look, where we are with Pfizer right now, they have requested an amendment to their EUA to include kids between the ages of 12 and 15 based on the data that they released to us at the end of March, which showed really good safety tolerability as well as efficacy. Each stage along the way takes a little time. You can think of it in twos. It takes about, 2 months for the clinical trial, 2 to 3 months for them to get the safety tolerability and immunogenicity data. And then the FDA wants to see about 2 months of safety data after that. And then once an EUA is applied for, the FDA is going to take about 2 to 4 weeks. So we're kind of in the middle of the process with Pfizer to see whether or not the kids between the ages of 12 and 15 get the green light. And as Tom mentioned, the younger kids, it just takes time. I think we're looking more towards, first quarter of 2022 for those age groups.
So, Dr. Azar, that's actually the next question I wanted to ask you, because, of course, the big question with kids is getting them back into the classroom. But also, as Tom mentioned in his piece, it's about us reaching herd immunity, getting to that about 80% or so number of vaccinations needs to include this part of our population. So do you think that that could mean that kids could safely and pretty normally be back in school then? Would that be the beginning of next year?
Yeah, look, I think for this fall, we're really looking at the teens and the preteens. I think that that's very realistic. I'm optimistic that that age group will be getting vaccinated, hopefully by the end of summer. As I mentioned, you have to do this very systematically and very, very carefully. We are, vaccinating young, ostensibly healthy children. But the good news is, Savannah, is that it does not require the tens of thousands of participants that we do in adults. Rather, it's a much smaller number. A few thousand children need to be evaluated in each age group. We're not looking at endpoints such as hospitalization or death. We're really looking at, their immune response that they can check in the blood tests, and of course, looking at cases of symptomatic COVID.
Now, Doctor, let's talk about the big hearing today on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. First of all, I'm sure you are sick of talking to me about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because, as you know, and our viewers may know, I received that shot a few days before the pause and have had Dr. Azar on speed dial because of that, who's been fantastic. And I'm very calm given her guidance and advice. But now the CDC could decide to clear the vaccine for use after these rare blood clots. But do you think that it will come with a warning label if they do clear it, similar to what Europe is doing?
Yeah, actually, and I was going to reference what the EMA did. They, in fact, have green lit the vaccine again for use in Europe, with the caveat that there is this association in all likelihood with these rare clots, and that full consent and awareness needs to be there. But they state, and I agree with this, that the benefits far outweigh that potential risk. I'm sure everyone is aware of Dr. Offit. He's a member of the FDA's independent advisory panel. And I think he sort of summed it up like this. If you take 1 million people who get COVID, 5,000 of those people are going to die, as opposed to potentially one person out of 1 million who might experience this rare event. So we really have to think about doing no harm. And I think withdrawing the vaccine for vulnerable populations would be absolutely doing more harm than good.
Dr. Azar, that is such a great way to put it in context. Thank you for joining us here and for taking my many phone calls. You're the best. See you soon.
Take care.
3 days have passed since Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murdering George Floyd. And for many, news of the verdict and what it could mean, all of that is still sinking in. I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander, joining us now from Atlanta. And Blaine, you spoke with HBCU students about the outcome of the case. These students are part of a generation. They've grown up watching these high-profile cases, from Trayvon Martin to George Floyd. Talk to us about that and their reaction to the verdict.
Joe, they've been watching them and they've been living through them, unfortunately. So right now I'm in the heart of the Atlanta University Center, the AUC as it's called, Morehouse College right behind me, Spelman College is right in front of me, and Clark Atlanta is around the corner. But when I spoke with this group of students, they made the point that really the George Floyd case, from his death when that video was released to the protests over the summer to the verdict just this week, has had a profound impact on their entire college experience. So to that effect, they really have been watching this perhaps more closely than most. But as you mentioned, not just this George Floyd case, but these students and those in their age range kind of hold the unique distinction of growing up and watching similar cases like these unfold throughout their teenage years. And they say that it has had a profound impact. Quick show of hands, how many of you were surprised by the verdict? You were. So all of you were surprised in some way that it came down guilty. How many of you were relieved? 3 of you, okay.
So it's hard for us to say that I feel relieved, because then I have to gear up for something else that I have to champion.
Honestly, it was very celebratory. When our professor said, guilty, you see kind of the weird backlash and reaction from some people, some political figures, some people in the news. And that celebration kind of gets dampened a little bit when you realize how much work there still is to be done.
You're 21, 22 years old now. So you all were 11, 12, 13 years old when Trayvon Martin was killed. And after that, you saw the death of Michael Brown and Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. To what degree do you feel that this has almost been a constant presence in your life while growing up?
It's draining.
If it wasn't for the deaths of Trayvon Martin when I was in middle school, I wouldn't have become passionate about learning about social justice, social change, mass incarceration, and policing.
So this started when you were in middle school, years ago.
Yeah, and so it kind of slowly planted the seed.
We have to keep some form of hope. We have to allow this to be something that takes us to the next direction, because I'm ready to leave this moment and on for a new chapter.
So, Joe, you heard their very insightful perspective when they've been talking about not just watching the verdict this week, but watching all of this unfold over really the formative years of their lives. So when I asked them about their future plans, 3 of them are seniors, graduating seniors. Another one is a junior. And I asked them whether this will have any impact on their paths going forward. And all of them said, yes, they do believe it will. One says he wants to go into politics, so he wants to look at policy that would prevent something like this. Another said that she didn't have any idea that she could be an activist until growing up with this sort of thing, and so that's something that she wants to carry into life. So, of course, all of this having a very profound impact and kind of shaping this generation as they prepare to go out into the world. And, Joe, before I toss it back to you, just a second ago, I rattled off 3 of the 4 AUC schools. I also have to say Morris Brown is also around the corner, too. Can't leave them out.
Good,
back
good. Got to get them all in. Blaine, very important conversation. I'm so glad you were able to share that with us. Thank you.
Coming up, after a pandemic-fueled 2-month delay, the Oscars are set to return to television this Sunday.
And with the ceremony comes a return to some form of normalcy. We'll explain next. I wanted to make sure we got a chance to preview the 93rd Annual Academy Awards airing this Sunday night. This year's Oscars will be scaled down and held at both the Dolby Theater and Union Station in downtown L.A. Most nominees will appear in person, but some will appear via satellite in places across the globe. The show will have no host this year, but will feature a cast of big-name actors and actresses presenting the awards. This year also is the most diverse group of nominees ever. 9 actors of color are nominated this year, compared with just 1 last year. Minari actor Stephen Yeun is the first ever Asian American nominated for Best Actor. Also in that category is the late Chadwick Boseman, who is the favorite to win for his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. More history. This is the first year ever that 2 women have been nominated for Best Director, including Chloe Zhao, the director of Best Picture favorite Nomadland, and a few other sort of modifications. I think there'll be like a red carpet that's similar, but not quite like it normally is. So a taste of normalcy, a taste of, pandemic world, but it's something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worked out well when they've done this kind of like hybrid sort of normal thing. Like the Grammys were actually a great show, I thought.
The Grammys were great and very creative. And Steven Soderbergh is the guy behind the Oscars this year, so you know it's going to be creative. It's supposed to have a sort of cinematic theatrical feel. So.
Ooh, great. Well, we can't wait to watch. I have a lot to watch before we get to Sunday.
Yes.
To know what's going on.
You might be tired of movies at that point.
Have my picks, exactly. I know. But Bill Cairns, I think, is going to tell us that Sunday's a good day for that. All right, thanks, Joe. Wildfires have devastated California in recent years, none more than 2020, the worst fire season in the state's modern history. But in an experimental forest in the Sierra Nevada, scientists believe they found a solution: more fire. NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward explains.
High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, we watched this team set fire to the forest floor. As a news crew used to record-breaking fire seasons, it scared us to death.
So I look at this and I think this could get out of control at any moment. But you look at this and you know different than I.
That's right, yeah. It's virtually impossible for this to become a wildfire.
Rob York is a professor of forestry at UC Berkeley.
We're going to keep an eye out to make sure the fire is where we want it to be.
His office is this experimental forest in Northern California, where his team studies the benefits of fire.
It's not that we don't want fire, it's that we want the right type of fire.
You and I probably think of forests the same way, right? As a dark, shadowy environment. Well, it turns out this is actually what it's supposed to look like. 300 feet of visibility in every direction. I would get a sunburn here if I didn't wear a hat. That is the role of fire in making a healthy forest.
Here's a 1915 photograph from the Sierras. Here's the same place in 2002. Photos show that fire has always been part of California. But 20th century humans began fighting fires, and too well. This is a forest that hasn't burned in years. It's lush and green, but that makes it a ticking time bomb. Most of California's forests look like this. And drought and high temperatures in 2020 turned all this fuel into the worst fire season in modern history, burning a record 4 million acres and destroying thousands of homes and other buildings. The fires turned Bay Area skies an apocalyptic orange, sent plumes of smoke all the way across the continental U.S., and increased hospital admissions by as much as 10%. Experts say so-called prescribed burns, small intentional fires to thin out the forests, could prevent those mega fires. The governor's new budget sets aside $1 billion toward wildfire prevention and specifically calls for prescribed burns.
When people are driving down the road up here in the forest and they see the smoke, I want them to think, oh, cool, that's a prescribed fire.
Researchers here just finished burning this portion of the experimental forest.
This is actually the effects that we intended and we like to see.
How do I know the difference between this and the devastation of a wildfire? This looks damaged in a bad way.
If you just look up at the overstory trees, our big trees here, they're green and they're fine. We're not going to see a lot of damage in our larger overstory trees.
In fact, the soil here is better for new trees than it was before the burn.
Are you hopeful that people are beginning to learn we shouldn't just put out all fire every time?
I think we can get there with education and just with more people using fire and people getting used to it.
The question now, in a state of nearly 40 million people, can we afford to give the natural fire cycle the land it needs each year?
Jacob Ward, NBC News, Georgetown, California.
Let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome. Good morning, Claudio.
Good morning, Savannah. Well, time is quickly running out to save the 53 crew stuck inside the submarine that went missing in Indonesia on Wednesday. Now, rescue planes and ships are trying to desperately spot the vessel before the submarine runs out of the air supply. And according to officials, that could happen as early as tomorrow. And today, for the second and last day, world leaders meet online for a climate change summit that yesterday saw President Biden pledging that the U.S. will cut its greenhouse emissions by half by the end of the decade, and other world leaders making similar promises. Now, it's unclear whether the other world leaders were inspired by President Biden's words. He said that climate change is an existential threat of our time, or by the words of another leader who attended the summit, Pope Francis, who said that God forgives all the time, man forgives sometimes, and nature no longer forgives. But now, last but not least, well, this is a story that looks like a scene that looks like out of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, a river of milk running through the country of Wales. Well, now the river turned white after a milk tanker overturned and spilled its contents into the water. Here's a perfect breakfast story for you, even though I must admit here in Italy, we dream of rivers of coffee, not milk, guys.
Us too.
I would just eat large cookies. Claudio, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Coming up, yet another historic launch for NASA and Elon Musk's SpaceX. 4 astronauts are now on their way to the International Space Station on a previously used craft.
We'll chat with the editor-in-chief of Space.com about the mission next.
It's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
And on this Friday, CNBC's Bertha Coombs is with us again. Hi, Bertha. Good morning.
Hi, Joe and Savannah. I know you're watching your Bitcoin investments. Well, Bitcoin this morning dropping below $50,000. I know you guys are hip like that. So the currencies and other cryptocurrencies are also under pressure as well. Ether, Ripple, and Litecoin. Basically, they've wiped out about $260 billion in market valuation. The move may be on speculation about President Biden's proposal that is expected to be unveiled next week to raise capital gains taxes on wealthy Americans. A lot of folks thinking that could hurt investments in digital assets. But traders say the declines are likely temporary amid growing acceptance by retail and institutional investors of cryptocurrencies as a mainstream asset. Meantime, Instagram is testing ads in Reels, its rival to TikTok. The ads can be up to 30 seconds long, just like videos on Reels, and they'll look a lot like the ads you see in Instagram stories. They're vertical, full screen, but unlike those ads, you can like, comment on them, share them, or save them when it comes to the ads in Reels. Meantime, Mattel trying to get all hip and futuristic, considering turning its collector brands into non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. The toy maker making the comment after posting a record surge in quarterly sales, as a lot of parents armed with stimulus checks snapped up Barbie dolls, Hot Wheels, and Matchbox cars and toys to keep their kids entertained over the last 3 months, usually a slow period coming after the holidays. Now, NFTs, which are a type of digital asset that exists on a blockchain, it's this very technical thing. They're similar to Bitcoin. They've exploded this year. Some artwork selling for tens of millions of dollars. But if you're a dad thinking, this will be a cool investment for my kid, I'm telling you, if you buy one of them, buy the actual Hot Wheel and Barbie dream house. The kid doesn't want
thank you.
NFT. I don't think there's any kids who have NFTs on their Santa list.
Yeah, we don't get that, Bertha.
Right?
All right, thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.